3 months ago, I put out a $2,000 call for artists to expand the world of Demon Souls to create bosses, environments, enemies, and lore for the icy lands beyond the northern limit. For in Demon Souls, there are 6 worlds to explore, but one of them is lost behind a broken archstone. According to cut content in the game, this was supposed to lead to the northern limit, a human frontier on the edge of the land of the giants. It's a world of ice, outlandish creatures, and perhaps answers to some of the deeper mysteries in the game. And regardless of whether this area is added or the Archstone repaired in the upcoming remake, I wanted us to be able to imagine and visualize this place. And as always, you guys delivered. What I'm showing on screen are such good entries, and while unfortunately none of these made it into the top 10, they came so close and we debated long and hard about each of these. So I want to start with them. One of my favorites was by Mache Yannick, who depicted a knight exploring a lost castle, a place that was gifted to the giants, who ended up abandoning it because these giants had no need for such shelter or material wealth. Another place that scored really highly was by John Bick, who beautifully rendered 3D scenes that looked like they could actually come from the upcoming remake. And how could I not mention Ab and Rain, a dual team of artists who designed a dual boss fight as well, telling the story of the 2 small figures who stand at the foot of the broken archstone. This was very similar to another entry by Natalie, who also brought the 2 smaller figures to life, except this time they were the children of the grim matriarch demon, the queen of the northern lands, who hides an insectoid demon behind her poise and her grace. But in the end, only one could be chosen to officially start our top 10 countdown today, and I'm so excited to say that it's the Iron Baroness by Titanilla Pitsvor. This is the first boss you're to encounter as you journey into the northern limit, and she guards a temple inspired by the cut content from Intruders. Indeed, we see their remains here, soldiers from an old war with the giants, frozen to the floor where they stand. For her long, ornate battle halberd leaves behind frostbite as she swings, for a charged AoE attack that leaves her really vulnerable. She can also summon a flock of these shadow birds from the cut content, which are themselves an enemy that you need to kill as they fly towards you. When she's close to death, she'll enter a more aggressive phase and her eyes will turn blue, hinting at the light of the Shadow Men, which burns behind her mask. This is a really cool twist, because the Shadow Men are also creatures that feature prominently in the cut content, and it explains why she's so tall and slim. This piece intrigued my curiosity, and man, while I wish that curiosity was a little bit more rewarded with a longer lore entry, aesthetically at least, this might just be the strongest entry, and I'm not going to forget the tall, striking figure of the Iron Baroness. One piece with a really powerful narrative was by Tim Kelly, which takes us beyond the broken 6th Archstone to a land that has had its fabric of reality broken, which is, indeed, exactly what the Archstones were created to uphold. I had a life once, a family. That life was stolen away. One night I felt an inexplicable dragging, a tugging at my soul to go north. As I trekked past the northern limit, I lost all sense of time. Flashes of lucidity cut through moments of terror and cold. A fear gripped me that I did not know, and evermore my journey became incomprehensible. I remember towering stone structures, frozen wastes, blackness, and then, out of that terrible fog, a city. It was warped, bent by unseen hands. Behind the shimmering landscape, through mist and snow, I felt her. I came to call her the Weaver, for the world she made had been woven from the fabric of an existing one. In the shadows, I felt her presence, the queen who had made this place her dwelling. The city was beautiful. I felt connected to it. I understood what it was and what it had been. It was the city of the giants, but it was not the same. The Weaver had twisted it, along with its inhabitants. They stood outside the city, in shadow and fog. I felt their forlorn gaze. Remnants of their old pride remained, left behind as a cruel joke. Within the shadows of the city, things changed. The walls became trees, roots quaking with desire to devour. I latched onto things I knew to stay grounded, a piece of grass or a rock, but those things too were twisted. I kept finding myself staring into the dark, a part of me desperate to go deeper. Even now, I yearn to return to that place despite the fear. I'm eager to feel her again. As some believe the Old One to be a mercy upon humanity, so too do I believe the Weaver to be responsible for bringing something new into the world. For now, she resides beyond reach and recognition, atop the tower she has woven. Soon you shall all see. I felt like the quality of that narrative would really speak for itself, and while it's a little bit far from the cut content concepts of the competition, we all loved this beautiful, surreal, outlandish take on the land of the giants. This whole area was cut from the game, but some enemy models still remain in the files. While, in my opinion, they look a bit underdeveloped and off, many artists actually took advantage of that and chose to polish these designs. That's where D-Raw comes in. Here, we have their owl sorceress, weak to fire and wielding this wooden catalyst. It's rendered in incredible detail, making it probably my favorite enemy design in the entire competition. These shadowbirds are the inhabitants of D-Raw's take on the cut content castle, but where D-Raw excels most is in character design, so let's talk about Moru, the Elder Giant. Moru was one of the last Elder Giants, gifted the Archstone, but also responsible for its destruction, for the Deep Fog was coming. And even though he smashed the Archstone with enough force to dent his giant cleaver, it was all in vain. The Deep Fog attached itself to him and started to corrupt him. In Demon Souls, the Deep Fog is actually said to be spread by the demons themselves, and I love that D-Raw actually shows this process in his entry, with the fog stemming from the corruption on Moru's left side. Interestingly, this also affects the gameplay. If you strafe to the right into his shroud of fog, then you'll take damage over time. But if you strafe to the left, towards his weapon, then you'll be open to more attacks instead. Gimmicks like this are so important to Demon Souls because this is a game that has a lot of boss gimmicks, and they almost always have some exploitable quirk that makes them interesting to fight. As this fight progresses, the corruption spreads, and similar to the fight with Artorias, Moru starts to fight like a beast, throwing aside his weapon, pouncing and spreading the deep fog with reckless abandon. Tied for 7th place with D-Raw is Ung, who, you might remember, came 3rd in the last competition with his rendition of New Londo. As before, he uses the arrangement of his pieces to tell a story, and this time we immediately identify with the player, who enters a fog gate flanked by these enormous pillars and huge headless bodies littered before it. Their heads lie beyond the fog gate, and there are huge swords pitted in front of them. But your eyes aren't drawn to this, they're drawn past the giants to a giant slayer named Hute, a human who, ironically, now towers above them all. Hute was one of the commanders in King Alant's great army, but after the grueling war with the giants, Hute opted to stay behind, and he never returned to his homeland of Boletaria. Was he blinded by hatred and driven to slay all of the remaining giants, or did he, perhaps, stay out of guilt? That last sentence casts this shadow of doubt, and indeed Ung claims that Hute was racked with regret, and gave himself this heart-rending task of beheading the giants and making tombstones of sorts for them, with the swords that they once swung in battle. This idea is reinforced by a little gameplay twist where, if you resist the temptation to roll around and destroy all the boxes in this glorious display of particle physics, then if you don't do that, Hute will speak with you instead of fighting you. We especially adored the armor design here, which mirrors the armor of Duran, and I loved his weapons of choice, one perhaps for giants and one for men. This piece marks a common trend in this competition, which is the theme of humans committing really evil deeds and the whole race of giants going extinct as a result. But one whose entry really broke the mold is Icy with the Widower and the Husks. One of the cut content speculations about the giants was that they might have been a very tight-knit communal civilization, since their Archstone was granted to them all, rather than just to one ruler. Icy honed in on this point and created giants that were so bonded together that they actually take damage for each other. Not only that, but he interprets the word giants, plural, to mean that there are only 2 giants. Not necessarily a whole race, as we would expect. An abandoned journal in the wastes tells of a man exploring the frozen land after the fog had swept through. He writes that he's looking for a stone, which we can assume to be the Archstone, perhaps, and he goes past cities erased by fog, past beasts that hunt in the night, and he looks down over a ledge and spies a masked black demon, so tall it scrapes the sky. Its skin is burnt from the snow. The grooves on its body are cracked, and it's surrounded by these weeping husks. It locks eyes with the man, who shrinks away and runs back to his camp, terrified. The next day, in spite of himself, he returns to this place and realizes that there are actually two giants, and one of them is a corpse of a female lying on the ground. As he watches, the masked giant places its hand on its partner's cheek, collapses to his knees, and shrieks in unison with all of the husks, filling the valley with sound. To the man's shock, the female's chest begins to rise and fall. She was alive, and she's breathing. But looking down once more, he sees the husks turn as one, look at him, and cry out, "Brother, come down." You really have to read this one for yourself. The writing is incredibly haunting. It actually echoes Lovecraft all the way up to the twist at the end. Furthermore, the gameplay also has some Demon Souls gimmicks. You can fight the giant by slashing at its heels, or you can actually damage it by hitting the bonded corpse before it instead, which is a little bit easier, but it will infuriate all of the husks as well. If you read it, you realize Icy is the god of narrative, and their full entry will stick with you if you take the time to read it all. Now, all of these pieces are very high concept, by which I mean they feature significant bosses, big implications for the series, and really core concepts for the land of the giants, but man, not every entry can feature the deepest lore. Sometimes we have to appreciate the simpler things, the levels that lead up to these places, and that's where The Great Ravine by Kaio comes in. The Great Ravine was once the safest passage from Boletaria to the City of the Giants. That said, it was still dangerous, with dozens of conflicts between giants and humans, fought to the taste of metal left upon the tongue by a strange gas that permeated the ravine. But in one of these conflicts, something happened that would change this place forever. A chance spark ignited the gas, triggering an explosion of flames along the entire length of the valley, killing giants and humans alike, and completely altering the ecosystem within from that point onwards. Since then, the temperature has risen, great geysers of scalding water erupt from the ground, and from the depths of the caves, a creature they call the putrid cockatrice has emerged, rumored to have been the source of the terrible gas. Now, a new race has taken over this place. They're called scavengers, fragile, furtive beings that all of a sudden found themselves able to flourish here, dressed in the pillaged armaments of the humans that perished, and wielding shards of giant bone. The scavengers hide from the demons in their caves, but they also use traps, subterfuge, and the difficult terrain to take down their enemies. If you were to travel through this place as a player, you would have heavy objects thrown down upon you from their homes, which are built high up from the ground and the scalding water. You would have to somehow get up there, all the while fending off their domesticated dogs and the wild creatures of the scorched ravine. At the end, you'll come face to face with the putrid cockatrice, trapped in the depths long ago by the scavenger tribe, who now worship it as a deity that helped them thrive in the northern lands. It fights with claw and mouth, and it still exudes large amounts of gas that deals damage over time. So you should probably think twice before using any fire-based attacks down here, lest you fall into the same peril that the soldiers did all those years ago. Huge props to Kaio for creating such an imaginative early game level. It really helped me to connect with all the late game levels that most artists opted for. One of my favorite renditions of a late game level is The Giant Colony by Sebastian Franchini, which drops the player character into a seemingly untraversable land, which is a credit to the vast landscapes of the cut content. As you advance, vast plains give way to awesome valleys, a natural maze, with the higher reaches dotted by doorways that lead into the homes of the giants. In the past, giants dominated this land, and could be seen quite often, but somehow, after the first scourge, most were killed or imprisoned. The few that remain are close to death, but that is far, far preferable to the death that they face, to the end boss of this area, so they hide away in their caves to avoid being seen. Throughout the valleys fly spectral ravens, birds that are altered by the dark magic that has conquered this land, and to this end, these ravens have incredible sight and can spot their prey from miles above, at which point they'll caw so loudly it can alert others in the area. Another enemy that's been adapted from the cut content are the mimics, which you might remember. Sebastian explains that they're the shapeless remains of former humans, who have been tortured by the soul arts and stripped of their conscience and spirit. All of this just does a great job of arousing your curiosity as to what or who caused all of this, and the story that Sebastian provides is extensive, it's well written, and it's rewarding. Stationed at the northern limit to defend the giants, King Alant and his brother Ridiel launched a series of expeditions into the northern lands to gather the giants' knowledge on soul arts. This lust for power led the king into a temple upon the highest mountain, from which he never returned. Years later, Ridiel's wife followed Alant's path, drawn not by greed, but by an invisible force. When she reached this place, the secrets within were too much to bear, and she too lost her sanity and never returned. Ridiel, back home, learned of her fate from the Maiden in Black, who communed with the Old One, and learned that his wife was not dead, but worse, she had become a servant of the Old One, an archdemon who had turned the old palaces of the giants into a place of soul harvesting. There, the peaceful giants were fed to the Old One, save for the strongest, who were resurrected in necromancy to serve as slaves. Perhaps, if the Slayer of Demons manages to destroy what remains of Ridiel's wife, their souls could be saved. It's a joy to have the world of the Sixth Archstone fleshed out so imaginatively, and as we crest into the top 3, we are reaching entirely new levels of world building. And perhaps no one does it better than Zen Cloud, the world-building god. What makes this title all the more impressive is that Zen didn't design a single environment. Instead, Zen builds his world through his 28 characters and their accompanying text. For example, these are his giants: Kazu the Tower, a walking city; Aki the Beacon, who guides lost travelers; Makoto, the Silent Sentinel, guardian of the northern limit; Sen, protector of the Pale Forest; Tomo, the Burrower, friendly to humans; and Dormir, the newest creation of them all. For these giants were all created by a pygmy race who lived in the northern limits long before any human, and who have an innate magic called flesh shaping, which is a unique sort of self-defense system. By consuming the bodies of the deceased, pygmies can create what they call white mud, which can be used as a sculpting material upon a willing participant. So the first giant they created with this was Kazu the Tower, who had thousands of pygmies living inside of him for a time, but that was before the Soul Wars, which precipitated the fall of the giants. Ulf, the Mountain King, desperately needed an heir, and so, with the flesh shaping of the pygmies, he created one. It was named Ridiel, which means horseman in Scandinavian, so a fitting steed named Esper was also made for him as a gift. However, in a twist of fate, Ulf actually had a true-born son a year later named Bragi, who was revised to be the heir to the throne when the true story behind Ridiel's creation was revealed. Upset at the nature of his fake existence, Ridiel was persuaded by Ambassador Lorraine, a demon in disguise, to fabricate a story about how the Northern Limit is planning to invade Boletaria with the Soul Arts, and so the Soul Wars began. King Ulf also had a demon misguiding him, Kolpa, the advisor who feeds on guilt. Beset by demons, and with the king of Boletaria bearing down upon him, the war was lost. Both his sons were killed, and Alant shattered King Ulf's soul into pieces, one of which became anger, a fragment of his soul, furious at the death of his sons. Then the Soul Wars awoke the Old One, and the following Demon War wreaked further havoc upon the land and its natives. The pygmies, with only the giant Makoto to defend them, all perished save for 2, who busied themselves creating a new giant named Dormir. The Alkin sorcerers succumbed to demonic corruption. The Sinjorlfir, who created Ridiel's soul, fought back by creating berserkers infused with beastly souls, and the Sormir cutthroats thrived, switching sides for gold and devouring the natives whole. There's so much more, but these were my favorite parts, and I think I covered most of the art that I described. But I encourage you to download this and read more in the art linked in the description. Congratulations to Zen Cloud on coming third. For second place, we enter The Lost City by Christian Reyes, a piece that instantly grabs your attention, inspiring you to read about what you've witnessed all the way to the end. The first shot has you, a mere dot in the landscape, standing before a giant demon, beholding an even more colossal gateway. It makes you feel small, which is a valuable feeling when exploring the land of the giants. and after defeating your first headless demon, you approach the gateway in the second shot and realize how littered it is with the swords and armor of fallen warriors. Clearly, a battle was fought for this place. The third shot has you walk through to the outskirts of a city, sheltered in the overhang of an enormous glacier. This is actually a really neat reference to a rare environmental detail in the cut content, where an overhang is supported by a giant pillar of ice. A green glow draws you towards a cave, and here you're supposed to fight the second headless snow demon, which is stronger than the last and can attack with swords, rocks, and bodies from the landscape around it. You defeat the boss and make it inside the cave. Here the architecture becomes a bit more surreal, with inverted Aztec-style pyramids built up to the cave roof. These are aspects of Mesoamerican culture, and there's also a theme of being suspended upside down, and both of these things are foreshadowing for what's to come. The fifth shot reveals an immense ancient city inside the mountain, with a blue light in the gateway, casting this otherworldly light on the colossal pyramids to either side. Here, details become a little denser, and you can spy demons lurking in the shadows and peeking over the tower. All the creatures are unrecognizable, save for one, the last headless snow demon. In times past, these were the three leaders of the giants, something that's alluded to subtly in their tattoos and attire. But when the colorless fog came, turning everyone into demons, they had to make a choice. Should they live on and become powerful demons, or should they sacrifice themselves, please the gods, and prevent their bodies being used against their people? In keeping with that Mesoamerican theme, they chose sacrifice, and taking a blade to their abdomen and to their neck, they died. Then they became demons regardless, accelerating the end of this civilized world. It's this perfect little twist of tragedy, and, this might surprise you, but I actually really like that stuff. If you're looking carefully, you might find recognizable elements on their shadowy backs, and also in the background of the fifth image, which is a final sign of what's to come. A blue light from the main pyramid calls the demon slayer up the long stairway to find that, within, suspended upside down, quite clearly having been tortured, is a dead old one, the first to ever exist. I love that you understand the tragedy here without really needing to be told anything, but to help flesh out the narrative, directly underneath the ancient being, you can see someone called the Maiden in White. Turns out, this old one created life as we know it. All the way back when it was still alive, things were peaceful, and so the gentle oldest one began an eternal slumber, aided by the Maiden in White. In the time since, civilization grew, and the leaders of men, called the Monumentals, discovered the ancient's lair and offered protection to this powerful being. I love that Christian hints at a sinister origin for the Monumentals, something that the game does as well, so it's really smart to bring that up. Here, they built a kingdom around this ancient being, but they experimented on it, craving knowledge of the soul arts. Realizing her deception too late, the Maiden in White awakened the oldest one, but it was dying. So with its last breath, another old one was awakened, and it was this second old one that began the first demon scourge, a response to human greed, to fight poison with poison. Of course, if you know anything about Demon Souls lore, the first scourge was resisted, and the Archstones were created to seal the old one. There was peace until the second scourge. But Christian goes on to explain the second scourge too, for he explains that King Allant tracks the giants to this city in the mountains, where he finds the Maiden in White. Knowing full well the greed of men causes its own downfall, she teaches Allant the soul arts willingly this time, and the second scourge is inevitably triggered, the old one awakens again, and the events of Demon Souls are set into motion. Diving into the lore behind the first and second scourge is such a great idea, and the concepts at play here are absolutely phenomenal. I love how the vengeful Maiden in White and the benevolent oldest one are the reverse of the benevolent Maiden in Black and the vengeful old one. I love the internal consistency in this piece as it draws from Mesoamerican culture and the cut content, and I adore the environments that Christian created. This is perhaps the most atmospheric piece in the whole competition, and for a game like Demon Souls, that is a wonderful thing to achieve. You can find Christian Reyes on ArtStation and Instagram, where he'll field your inquiries and commissions, and if you've been listening at all, you know I can't recommend him highly enough. This art is a great extension of the talents that we saw from him in the Elden Ring art competition, and I really hope we see him take place in the next one as well. But finally, for first place, we have this drawing my son Arlo did on his Etch-a-Sketch. Magnificent. Okay, for real, how could we not give first place to Jane? We've listed many gods in this competition, and Jane would have to be the goddess of quality and quantity, for not only does she submit video, music, lore, 2D art, 3D renders, in-game shots, vertical slices, maps, level selection screens, map blueprints, NPCs, and art breakdowns, all of it is somehow good as well. Like, don't get me wrong, you don't have to contribute this much art to win. Usually it's actually better to just submit a few pieces of art and make sure they're all your best work, but Jane somehow has the capacity to contribute this much stuff with no missteps at all, and that is something to be applauded. So let's start at the top of her main image, this vertical slice of two-dimensional art with the old one soaring above it all. Below is the Necto Shrine, where maidens were taught to refuse worldly pleasures and to direct their sight inward instead. To this end, initiation takes place at the candle pot held by the godly maiden, whose 3 sets of hands cover her eyes, perform magic with the phosphorescent pole, and pour wax down below to permanently seal the eyes of the receiving candle maiden. Of course, this means that there are more than just our maiden in black. There was once many maidens, with newly initiated maidens wearing white and darkening their garb the longer that they pray and learn. In the corner of this image is the maiden in ashen, who used all of her strength to draw you here through the broken archstone. She needs our help, for the shrine is overrun by a caste of evil alchemists, who are hunting down and experimenting upon her sisters. Defeat the corrupt alchemist, who Jane interprets as this character from the cut content, and the Ashen Maiden will spirit you away to the ruined land of the giants so that you can learn from the past. This was once a sacred land of pilgrimage, and the first NPC you'll meet is one such pilgrim who stands before the body of a giant and tells you of their deaths to giant ballista and forbidden magic. For humans craved knowledge of the soul arts and fought this race for their secrets. Here, beastly humanoids, once allied with the giants, are hostile to you immediately, and this area culminates in a fight against the last giant, where you have no choice but to bring him down. The third and final location brings us to the frontier of the northern limit, where we discover who was responsible for the evil delivered upon this land. You warp in to find yourself in a grim, dark castle, where an NPC, a young girl, tells you dreamily that the new ruler of the land, Lord Ridiel's nephew, is very pretty, but that no one has seen him in a very long time. The girl sells a lot of cures for poison and rot, which is excellent foreshadowing of what is to come. The next in-game shot places you before a frozen magician, who's frozen in place in a desperate attempt to seal off the throne room. It shatters, revealing a party of knights turned to stone, and Kenneth, Archdemon of the Northern Limit. After Lord Ridiel's imprisonment in the Tower of Latria, Kenneth took over affairs at the northern frontier, and, inspired by his uncle, King Allant, Kenneth took to the soul arts, supporting Allant's awakening of the Old One by becoming an archdemon. With a dedicated cult of serpentine followers, maidens for worship, and soldiers for war, he commanded the extermination of the giants and demonstrated that any of his enemies were destined to be conquered. What an entry. Jane is a master of every medium, so if you need someone with varied talents for your project, you can find her contact details and her art station in the description below. I'm honored to be able to award her first place, and to reward her and others in the top 10 with their share of $2,000. Quick shout out to my patrons here. You guys make it easy to justify dropping thousands of dollars on artists, so thank you. And for those of you that do appreciate this art, Soul of Cinder patrons who pledge for 3 months or more will now get this great art I commissioned called Skyward Swords sent to you as a poster. So if you're interested in supporting and getting something like this, then look into the description for that as well. The most painful thing about these videos is the artists who came so close but only just missed out, so I also want to take a moment to give credit where credit is due. Please continue watching, and please check out all of this work and more in the description below. Special thanks to Angelica for being the first frontrunner in this competition, giving me hope for what was to come. Well done to Michelle for contributing some of the best gameplay concepts with giant beasts that rear up from the snow and a series of boss battles in an arena. Nolan, as always, you provide utterly fantastic concepts, and we loved your sculptor, hewn out of this rough pillar, who created the 6th archstone, only to break it once he became disillusioned with his past work. Holdsworth Hands, you had the best pixel art, and your story and concept work is getting better and better. Jessica, you had a rare take on world tendency, and honestly some of the best concepts in the competition. Mark, your take on the Yeti enemy was incredible. Marianne, your 3D work detailing the monumentals will stick with me. Maxwell, Zach, and Chris, your planning was unparalleled, and getting Richard on board was a fantastic idea. And to everyone else on our list of 32 frontrunners, keep an eye out for an email, because you're all very likely candidates for the Soul Arts book that I want to make, which I view as an opportunity for me and the judges to actually give you the credit and the presentation that your work really does deserve. But even if you weren't featured in this competition, know that I did see your art, I appreciate you, and I respect you so much for just having the will to complete an entire piece of work, and also the bravery to just put yourself out there. Finally, enormous thanks to the judges for this competition. John Devlin, who has helped in every competition, including this one. I couldn't have done it without you. And also thanks to our new judge, Ricardo Amique, which should be a familiar name to some of you. He brings the insight of an artist who has placed first in these competitions a couple of times. So you can find both of their artwork in the description and in the comments section below. Anyway, study up on Bloodborne artists, because that is where we're going next. And it might just be the final art competition for the foreseeable future. Thank you for watching. Three months ago, I put out a $2,000 call for
Hey, Balls! Thanks, dude.
I rarely get to play Among Us with voice.